Hey everyone, welcome to the April 2nd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my regular co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to be handicapping those three final Kentucky Derby preps taking place in Kentucky, New York, and California. Excellent cards at all three of those venues, though. We'll focus primarily, though, on Keeneland on Saturday, where we'll talk about their late Pick 5 sequence. It's an all-graded stakes Pick 5 sequence, culminating with that Grade 2 bluegrass, but there are a couple of Grade 1 events in the mix there, the Madison and the Ashland being a prep for the Kentucky Oaks. So excellent racing action in Kentucky. Then we'll move on to Aqueduct. We won't talk about quite as many races, but we will discuss those two preps for the Oaks and the Derby, the Gazelle and the Wood Memorial. And we'll close things out at Santa Anita, where it's an interesting field of 10 entered in the Santa Anita Derby. Bob Baffert, though, does appear to have the favorite with Medina Spirit. So, Craig, a lot to look forward to this week with racing action around the country.
Yeah, this is always kind of the biggest week of the year as far as the Derby preps go. It's basically the end of the road other than next week's Arkansas Derby. I know we have, I think, the Lexington as well next week, but that's a much lower points race. This is the last three of the last four of the basically winning you're in races. So looking forward to this one. I think a couple of them aren't too competitive, but one is very competitive in my opinion, and just lots of good racing all around the country. I love when we have these big stakes-laden cards, and especially Keeneland having this all-stakes Pick 5.
Yeah, and this Pick 5 sequence does seem pretty manageable because we've got a good mix of large fields and some smaller fields, and all of them are relatively competitive races. So let's start things off with that Pick 5 sequence at Keeneland. It runs from races 7 through 11. Race 7 is the Grade 3 Commonwealth, going 7 furlongs for the older horses. A field of 7 entered here, and Craig, I think I know one thing before we start handicapping this race. There are two short prices on the morning line drawn down towards the inside, and I'm pretty confident that you're going to go against both of them.
Yeah, this was like almost like heaven, waking up and seeing the PPs and two horses that I almost always bet against and have been mostly right for a while. I mean, in the beginning, I thought Hidden Scroll definitely had some promise, but I started taking him on and didn't last time because it was just a much easier field. Flagstaff's a horse who always seems to run well, but doesn't seem to get the job done outside of a couple really small fields in California. So again, I'm going to look to beat both of those two. Hidden Scroll's return, I wasn't blown away at all by it. He didn't get much of a speed figure. He didn't show his usual early speed either. So I just think he's going to get over bet. It wouldn't totally shock me if he were to win here, but he's one I think you have to take on. That said, it's not the strongest field for a graded stakes race, but there are a couple that interest me, and I'll start with the horse that I'm going to make my top pick in here, and that is Special Reserve. He's a horse he's a 5-year-old, and first time off the claim for Mike Maker. He ran a career best, is what you want to see, and he's showing that confidence, jumping Special Reserve right up in class into this Grade 3 Commonwealth. He did win last time on the lead with pretty slow to moderate pace. He did face a little pressure, but it's usually not the kind of horse I love. But he's a horse who's won from off the pace before. He's been able to win with the tracking running style. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I think he draws okay. And mostly I just love his price because of the two that we've talked about, that I talked about already, that I think will get over bet. The other horse I find a bit interesting in here is Hog Creek Hustle. He's a horse who ran a huge speed figure, winning an allowance race back at Churchill in November. He ran a 121 that day, which would win this race if he could duplicate it. There are a few questions. He does turn back a little bit. He's a horse who doesn't always win much either. I think he's only 4 for 22 or something like that in his career. So he's one that, I think you have to be a little timid. He's a much lower price than my top pick in here, but I will definitely be playing him in exactas as well.
Yeah, I have no problem with trying to take a shot in this race, and I think Special Reserve as the longest price on the morning line is pretty interesting. I mean, the obvious question with him, I think, is the 7 furlong distance, because he's shown really improved speed in his recent starts, but he's done it primarily going 6 furlongs, so he's got to get that extra panel here. But at the kind of price he's going to be, I think it's fine to take a shot with a horse like that. And, of those two horses drawn down towards the inside that are short prices, I completely hear you that they're not I wouldn't say not trustworthy with regard to Flagstaff. Flagstaff just isn't that interesting from a wagering standpoint. Hidden Scroll maybe is the one you would say is not totally trustworthy. Flagstaff, I mean, he definitely is a player in this race. I just wouldn't want to take him as the favorite because he doesn't win that often, and he just so often runs the same speed figure, and we talk about it quite a bit. Well, this isn't the strongest sprint division in the world right now in 2021. You do feel like a horse can run faster, at least one of these, than the typical number that Flagstaff usually puts up. So I would try to beat him if he's a short price. Hidden Scroll is... I have to say, I ended up liking Hidden Scroll in this race a lot more than I expected to when I handicapped it, and I would probably even lean towards making him my top pick in here. I'll wait for you to gasp. I had written Hidden Scroll off because he really had just lost all consistency. It seemed like they had really just kind of lost the thread with him as they were trying turf last year. But I've got to say, while I wasn't thrilled with his return at Oaklawn last time when I first saw it and just kind of looking through that field, as I revisit the chart for that race, you can make a really strong argument that for whatever reason, that race should be a lot faster than the speed figures indicate. You're not the only one that has it slow. Horse after horse has run out of that race and come back and run 10 to 15 points faster. I mean, starting with the runner-up Royal Daher, who came right back and ran significantly faster in subsequent starts, and he just won at Oaklawn yesterday and got a 96 buyer. I didn't see what the TimeformUS number was for that race yet, but it just seems like he, Ancient Warrior, Lycan, who was fourth in that race and came back and was second the other day and has run since then, they've all been running significantly faster numbers than what they got behind Hidden Scroll. And when you watch that race, I mean, Hidden Scroll did not have a great trip because he was in behind horses early after a flat-footed start, was a little rank, and Florent Geroux, once he got into the outside, he shut the door on that field pretty quickly, and the reason to knock the performance at the time was that the field appeared to be weak, but maybe the field wasn't that weak, and I just think Hidden Scroll for Brad Cox, maybe he's figuring it out. I mean, he's got to get out of the gate this time. He's got to show that early speed that we're accustomed to seeing from him. But I think he's actually pretty dangerous in this race, and I have no idea what kind of price he's going to be, but I wouldn't be comfortable going against him here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any knocks. And honestly, as a fan of the sport, I wouldn't mind him beating me. If somebody's going to beat my horse and beat my wager out, I'd like to see it be him and kind of get things pointed in the right direction. And I can't really argue with anything you say. I do think the speed figure's a little low because it was a pretty roughly run race. There was a lot going on in that race that might have hampered the time. So, I mean, it was a really easy speed figure that day. So there's really no justification other than everybody ran faster coming back to make it bigger. But it's just the price for me. I'm suspecting at the worst he's going to be the 5-2 he is on the morning line just because he always seems to get bet somehow, despite everybody on social media talking about how he's a bet against. He always gets bet, so I'm suspecting that'll be the case here. But it wouldn't shock me if he won, and there were definitely some things to like out of that last race.
Yeah, I have no argument with the price on Hidden Scroll and the potential lack of value there. But looking at this race from a pick 5 standpoint, where you're just trying to survive some of these legs and get through it, I couldn't find myself latching on to many of the alternatives. So I feel like he's one that I, as reluctant as I am to say it, I might lean on a little bit in this Commonwealth. So we'll see how that plays out in the first leg of this pick 5 sequence. Moving on to the second leg, race 8 at Keeneland on Saturday. It is the Grade 2 Shakertown, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf. And Craig, no surprise to that fast pace label in the pace projector because there is a ton of speed signed on in this race.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's in addition, it's a big field of 13. A lot of the speed draws outside in the race. So it's hard to argue with the pace projector. I mean, we'll see if anybody scratches. And it's a race I just think when you see the morning line favorite is Bound for Nowhere, who is allegedly going to make one of his semi-annual appearances on the racetrack. I think you got to be interested to take him on because he draws that bad post. There's a ton of speed. Now, I will give Wesley Ward credit. When he shows up, he generally runs his race, but this just seems like a really tough spot in here. I was surprised Just Might actually was entered back on turf in here. We had talked about his racing at off the turf stakes at the fairgrounds, the Colonel Power, where he ran such a big figure. Maybe it's the 7 furlongs, but I would have given him a shot in the Commonwealth personally because he may very well have been he could have been the betting favorite based on that last race. He would have to tackle the distance, as I said, but I think he'd have had a lot better shot in there than he does in this one. just because of all the speed signed on. And because of that, I just have to go to the logical horse, and that's Imprimis in here. He's a horse who has tactical speed, but he's always going to come running late. He's got the best TimeformUS late pace rating in here. He draws inside, should get a good trip with Paco Lopez. I do get a little worried that he'll find himself in traffic and maybe do something silly, but that I don't ever want to make wagers placed on something like that. So Imprimis will be the top pick for me. I thought about Kanthaka in here, but he just looks like a horse at 5.5 to me. Might be a little bit too short for him. He's probably prepping for some longer sprints, probably at Belmont when they go there for Graham Motion. So for me, it just seems like a race that's set up perfectly for Imprimis. And if he doesn't win, I think it would be pretty disappointing.
Yeah, we're on the same page about the favorites in here, I think. Imprimis just seems like he's a really logical horse based on recent form and his running style. They just have to work out a trip for him, and that sometimes is easier said than done in a field with 13 runners and the amount of speed that's signed on here, because you have to pick the right path for a horse that's drawn down towards the inside, and this could be a race where you just have a bunch of tiring runners coming back in your face at the 8th pole, and if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can be disastrous. I mean, just go back and watch Imprimis' Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint to see an example of that, when he arguably might have won that race if he had gotten a clear path, and he ended up finishing 13th because he got completely sawed off in the stretch. So trips will be really important for him. Also for Bound for Nowhere, though, because, I mean, you're correct in saying that Bound for Nowhere, when he shows up, he usually runs a nice race, but I think rarely has he faced the kind of pace scenario that he's going to meet here with so many other speeds signed on. And he's not a horse that we've ever seen coming from far off the pace or mid-pack. I mean, he's usually right up on the lead. So he might have to work much harder in the early going than he's accustomed to get his typical position up front. And I'm just a little worried that he's not going to be able to pull the right trip. I'm maybe a little bit more encouraged about the chances of Kanthaka than you are. I feel like 5.5 furlongs probably is on the short side for him, but I think that distance may be somewhat mitigated by the fact that there's so much pace in this race. And while I would prefer him at 6 furlongs, I'm not going to make too much of the distance given that the pace is likely to come back. And he does seem like even more of a confirmed closer than Imprimis, who sometimes wants to be a little closer to the pace. Kanthaka's going to be out the back early and trying to pass them, most of them in the stretch. And his last race at Woodbine, I know it was a little disappointing that he was third there against some Canadian sprinters, but he did not get the right pace set up in there and was kind of stuck inside upper stretch. His rider tried to go to the rail, then had to angle off and alter course. That was not as bad of a performance as it seems. He just has to run a little bit better and frankly turn the tables on Imprimis because he was beaten by him at Kentucky Downs last year. One other horse that I want to mention in this race who's just going to be a gigantic price, and when you've got a pace scenario that's this wild, I think it's not crazy that I'm going to talk about a horse that looks a little bit hard to make on paper, and that would be the number 8 American Butterfly, who's 50 to 1 on the morning line for Dwayne Lucas. Maybe he's just not a turf horse, but I will say he really had no chance in his one prior turf start in that American turf last year when, first of all, it was going a distance that's way too far for him, and also he got caught up in a ridiculously fast pace where 3 horses got involved in a duel in the front end and they all fell apart. American Butterfly, since then, he's come back sprinting on the dirt at Oaklawn, and he's run okay. I mean, I'm not going to say that he's running well enough to win this race, but he is a horse that I've always wanted to see sprinting on the turf. And this is a difficult spot that they've chosen for him to try it for the first time. But I've always had this idea that this horse could be a turf sprinter because he's by American Pharoah. He's got a big turf pedigree on the dam side. His dam's by Warfront. His dam herself was a turf horse. And I just want to see him do it once. Maybe he will run the race of his life and finish 8th in here, but he's going to be a big, big price. So I just wanted to mention him.
Yeah, he was actually a horse I was going to mention as well, despite that crazy 50 to 1 morning line, just because he has a really nice late pace figure in here, which is something you don't often see, mostly dirt horses, when they move to the turf. So given the pace setup in here, he's definitely a horse I will be throwing into my vertical plays at a huge price.
Moving on to that Keeneland prep for the Kentucky Oaks. It is the Grade 1 Ashland, race 9, the middle leg of this pick 5 sequence. And we've just got a field of 6 entered, but we do have some nice fillies in this field, including the 3-year-old debuts of 2 promising horses from 2020, those being Simply Ravishing, who was the 4th place finisher in last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, as well as the winner of the Alcibiades over this track, and Malathot, who is the undefeated winner of last year's Grade 2 Demoiselle at Aqueduct. So both of these horses have to overcome layoffs, but they were both running some nice races at 2. So if they've taken any kind of step forward as 3-year-olds, they are the horses to beat in this spot.
Yeah, for sure. Just based on speed figures alone, they've run faster than the rest of the field. Well, Malathot's basically the same. Simply Ravishing has run some faster numbers, but like you say, these are 3-year-olds. But I'm a little leery. It's pretty late to be coming back. They could certainly win, and I'll be upfront on this one. This is a race where I'm going to spread for sure, even though it's a small field, because I just don't have a great feel for it. I don't love any of the short price horses. I mean, Simply Ravishing, she looks okay, but she definitely regressed toward the end of that campaign last year. She didn't run very well in the Goldenrod as the heavy favorite. Well, and despite it, she was losing the Travel Column and Clairiere, who we saw dominate at the fairgrounds this year, but her speed figure showed some regression, and Ken McPeak doesn't really bring them back to win all that often. Now, granted, I would assume in here he really wants to point for the Oaks, and maybe he'll crank this one up more, but at a short price, I don't love her. Malathot, I mean, she's fine. She's won all her races. A couple of them were over that quirky Aqueduct surface. She hasn't run particularly fast for Todd Pletcher. But we know Todd can get them ready, and I certainly think she can win. But again, at a short price, I don't love her either. Will Secret comes out of that win in the Honeybee. Of the 3 morning line favorites, she's the one I like the least. She just had an absolute dream setup up front. Slow pace, still only ran 100 TimeformUS speed figure, and what I think was a pretty weak field that day. So I'm going to actually look elsewhere for my top pick when I play verticals, and that's a 2-horse Past the Champagne. She's a horse who's coming out of what was a pretty strong maiden race. 2 horses have come back to win from that, including the runner-up. She ran a decent enough speed figure in there. She hit the triple-digit mark with a 101. She does have to tackle 2 turns for the first time, but I think she's going to be forwardly placed on a track where that can usually be a pretty good thing. I'll have to watch today and see how it plays in early on the card. But she comes from a family that just has thrown nothing but runners from her broodmare. So she's one I think is dangerous in here, and I think she'll probably go up a little higher than that 4-1 morning line, given the other ones I've already talked about.
Yeah, the 4 that you mentioned, I think, are the 4 main players in this race. And I have no problem with Past the Champagne. I thought she was impressive winning that maiden race at Gulfstream last time. She's got to handle the stretch out and distance, but she's probably going to be the 3rd or 4th choice in this race. So, I mean, if you're going to get that kind of price on her, maybe you think that's fair. I would lean towards those 2 favorites. I don't think I have a clever take on this race. What I will say about Malathot is that looking back through those New York races from last year, it felt like those fields at the time might have been a little stronger than they actually were, because a lot of horses have come back out of those races and really just not distinguished themselves as 3-year-olds. Of the ones that have run back, many of them haven't even run back. And they didn't come back particularly fast races at the time, as you were pointing out. So I'm a little bit concerned. The one point that I would make about her Demoiselle is that she was far superior to the runner-up Milfoy, who she only defeated by 3/4 of a length, because you might remember that was a day at Aqueduct over a very sloppy track. She was drawn the rail, she got stuck down inside, and she never looked comfortable racing on the inside. John Velasquez actually had to put her under the whip on the backstretch to just stay in contact with the leaders, and she finally made a move at the end of the race once they swung her out into the clear. So I feel like that's a race that she would have won by open lengths if she had been out in the clear throughout, which clearly is her preferred trip. And this time, you'd imagine breaking from an outside post position, Joel Rosario is going to use her a little more aggressively to not get stuck behind horses like she was last time. So I feel like if she gets the right kind of trip, she's certainly dangerous in this race. I would slightly prefer Simply Ravishing, who comes in with a very strong work tab showing for Ken McPeak, which leads me to believe that she is cranked up for this race. And while that goldenrod seemed so disappointing at the time, I mean, as you were pointing out, the first two finishers from that race, Travel Calm and Clairiere, have developed into really nice horses, arguably the two top contenders right now for the Kentucky Oaks of those that we've seen race so far in 2021. So maybe that wasn't as bad of an effort as it seems. And prior to that, Simply Ravishing was among the fastest 2-year-old fillies out there last year, even counting Vequist and Day Out of the Office, who beat her in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. So I feel like if she comes back as anything close to what she once was, or even takes a step forward, she's arguably the horse to beat in this race. So I would lean towards Simply Ravishing over Malathaat with a little past the Champagne. I agree with you about Will's Secret. I was not thrilled with those Oaklawn races. You can look up those fields in TimeformUS or DRF Formulator. The horses that finished behind her have really not distinguished themselves. Moving on to the penultimate race in this late pick 5 sequence at Keeneland. It is the other Grade 1 race on this Saturday card, the Grade 1 Madison, going 7 furlongs on the dirt for the fillies and mares, and an intriguing cast of characters with some of the favorites drawn towards the middle of the pack. In the number 4, Bell's the One, who was third behind Gamine when last seen in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, I should say. And number 5, Kamari, who is one of these Wesley Ward horses who doesn't run that often, but when she does run, she typically runs well. And when he does elect to run her on the dirt, she really runs well and rarely loses on that surface. So she's getting a real class test here, but she's definitely shown the potential to be this kind of horse. Just a lot of horses with some questions to answer and a few that could be affected by the pace scenario of this race.
Yeah, this a race as the guy who had a big hand in developing the pace projector. I have to lean on it here. It's a small field of 7. We show Monday Call on a lone lead and a race that favors horses on or near the early lead, and basically that's her. And it's kind of hard to argue with it looking through the PPs of these horses. And, I mean, it's not just that. There are plenty of things to like. She ran some really fast races as a 3-year-old filly. She's in the Brad Cox barn, who I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. It seems like he's doing more to get horses ready off the layoff. Didn't used to be a strong point of his, but it's something where he seems to have made a concerted effort to do more get better results off the bench. So she's going to be the play for me at 8-1 on the morning line. And it's not just because of her. When you look at her 3 main rivals, and Bell's the One, Kamari, and even Sconson, none of these horses really have any speed at all, and they're pretty pace dependent, and it's just hard to see a really fast pace in here. So for me, it's going to be Monday Call. I also like Sanus, who's drawn inside. I think she ran a big race last time, got a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. I had actually picked her out in California when she was going to run, but she wound up, they had canceled training and she tied up in her barn and had to scratch that day, so she didn't show up. And I guess this is kind of plan B. There is a turn back in distance, of course. She has been running in 2-turn races, but most of the time. But I think this is a good spot for her just because of that lack of speed. I think she's going to get good position, and if somebody's going to be able to wear down the winner, she's going to get first jump. So this is a race where I'm going to bet Monday Call. I'm probably going to play an exacta box of the 2 speeds and hope it plays out like the pace projector says.
Yeah, with regard to Monday Call, because I think she is a horse that you have to have an opinion about in this race, given that clear lead that she's shown enjoying on the pace projector, with a indicator saying that it's a favors on or near the lead situation. I wonder about some of those races that she won last year. I mean, she clearly wasn't facing the best company in that Ellis Park blowout win by 7 lengths. I know that Sconson finished behind her, but Sconson hadn't quite yet developed into the horse that she became late last year. And that race where she got the 122 TimeformUS speed figure in the 8 bells on the Derby undercard, she fated to finish 4th that day after getting involved in a wicked early duel with 4 Graces. They both lost that race, dueling each other into defeat. And when you've got a situation like that, where 2 horses just knock heads on the front end and they both knock each other out, I wonder if that just takes a lot out of a horse. And we saw both her and 4 Graces run back at subsequent starts at short prices, and they both just completely self-combusted and didn't show up at all. And I wonder if that performance against 4 Graces just really knocked her out. And you wonder when a horse is going to get over that. So I'm a little bit concerned that Monday Call might not come back to be the filly that she once was, though I guess the layoff might give you some confidence that Brad Cox can get her back to her best. But I just, even at a bigger price, I can't quite latch on to her here. I just have a feeling about this horse. I actually much prefer the one that you've been a fan of, Craig, that's drawn towards the rail, Sinenus. I was not the biggest fan of hers when she came into that race against Swiss Skydiver, the Beholder Mile. I think I was trying to talk you off her a little bit in that spot, and she ended up not running there, so we couldn't find out. But I feel like this is a better fit for her because there's not much pace signed on. While she's been showing speed in longer races, she does have the tactical speed that should translate well to this 7 furlong event. And I don't think she's going to be in front of Monday Call, but she should be sitting right off that horse. And I mean, you've been harping on how well she ran last time in the La Cañada, and I agree with you. That was a really fast pace, and she was the only one that kept going. And it just feels like Mike McCarthy took him a little while to figure her out, but he's got her going good right now. And I watched her last workout on XBTV because I wanted to see how she had come back because she was working so well going into the Beholder. And obviously, you said she had the issue and some time off, and her last workout was just as impressive as the ones we saw before. She worked in company with Smooth Like Straight, another top horse for the Mike McCarthy barn, and outworked that guy. So I feel like she's coming into this race in good form. And if she's a similar price to Monday Call, I would rather go with her because I have some questions about the two favorites, Bell's the One and Kamari, with regard to the kind of trips they're going to get. You know that Bell's the One's going to be compromised because she is just a confirmed deep closer, and she's always kind of at the mercy of the pace. She's in good form right now, or at least she was at the end of last year, but you do have to wonder how much pace she's going to get to run into. The horse that's a little bit surprising on the pace projector as to where she's placed is Kamari, because you kind of have this thought in your head of Kamari as being more of a speed horse, even though she's come from off the pace a few times, and she's actually shown behind Bell's the One on the pace projector. So I wonder where she's going to be placed early in this race.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Part of it last time at Oaklawn, even though she was only 2 lengths behind early, the pace was pretty slow that day. I think Amy's Challenge was in that race, but she didn't break particularly well and got shuffled back, and that just led to the pace being slow. And turf races are just generally slower overall. I mean, they don't look slower on the clock because it's a faster surface, but from a figure perspective, it's a little tougher to keep up on dirt. So it will be interesting to see if they can get her into the race a little bit quicker. I also wonder with her, I mean, 7 furlongs has to be a question as well. She's never went beyond 6 in her career. So just because she's a closer doesn't automatically mean an extra furlong is going to benefit her. It could be there's a reason Wesley Ward hasn't tried her at longer distances.
Yeah, and I will say, I like Kamari in this race. I just worry that she's not going to offer much value because it seems like she's always bet down to a short price, regardless of what surface they run her on. And I just worry a little bit about the trip. But I do think that just based on raw ability, she's every bit the equal of Bell's the One, and maybe even better than that horse. She just has to show up going 7 furlongs.
Yeah, she's definitely a horse I'm using in the pick 5 because personally, I think she's the best horse in the field. As I think you mentioned early on, she's undefeated on dirt and hasn't been particularly tested. So she's certainly dangerous. It's just a matter of the pace and distance, and not somebody I'd want to lean on and single. And I think the pace setup is a problem for her. But she's awful talented, and there's nothing to say that she couldn't sit closer if she has to in a slow pace and still have a good finishing kick. So I'm certainly not going to get knocked out of a pick 5 if Kamari wins.
Let's wrap up this late pick 5 sequence at Keeneland with that 3-year-old prep for the Kentucky Derby, the Bluegrass Stakes Grade 2 event going a mile and an eighth, offering 100 qualifying points to the winner of this race. On paper, it does look like it's pretty much a 2-horse race, and maybe just a 1-horse race, as Essential Quality is a heavy favorite, but he will have to deal with the Chad Brown-trained Highly Motivated, who's coming out of a 3rd-place finish in the Gotham. The story of this race, though, I think, rather than those two contenders, is just the overall lack of speed in this race. I mean, it's rare to see a blue color-coded bar in the pace projector in any Derby prep, that obviously indicating favors on or near the lead. But just looking through this field, this was almost a no speed rating because there is just nobody in this race that's really accustomed to racing anywhere close to the front.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. You don't see that very often, and I think it really sticks out that the two shown up front are Highly Motivated and Essential Quality. And I don't think anybody will look through their PPs and scream speed horse. The reason it's not a no speed, I believe, is because Highly Motivated is listed as a tracker instead of a mid-pack, which that one difference would have made it no speed. And I think that's mostly because he's been running in sprint races, and this is just his first time around 2 turns, so it's possible he's going to show some speed. But I mean, it looks like a match race to me. And personally, this is the race I spent the least amount of time on because I just think Essential Quality is the better horse of the two. The speed figures say he's got a significant gap over Highly Motivated and everybody else in this field for that matter. So it's a race I'm probably just going to be watching as a fan. It's hard to see any way where I see any value on Essential Quality, or even if it did like the runner-up, the second choice, Highly Motivated, he's not going to offer any value either. So it's just one I'm going to be watching, making some trip notes, see how it plays out, but I'm just going to watch.
Yeah, it's one of those races where I think I have to let price be my guide between these two horses. Essential Quality is going to be odds on. I think it's just a matter of how low the public decides to make him. If he's 2-5 and Highly Motivated is 7-2, I think that's probably a fair price on Highly Motivated. In a pick 5 sequence, I would use both of these horses pretty much in equal strength, because while I do think Essential Quality is way the horse to beat, the most likely winner of this race, I mean, you've got no dispute from me on that point, but I do think Highly Motivated has a chance to take a step forward here. And if he's going to be a much bigger price, I would lean towards him potentially taking that step forward in this race. I do not view Highly Motivated as a Kentucky Derby horse. I think eventually stretching out to 1.25 miles is not going to be his forte, but just going the 1.125 here, given the kind of pace setup that I think he's likely to get, I do think he's got a chance to beat the favorite, because I would imagine that the connections are going to send this horse to the lead. Essential Quality's connections, I'm sure, would be happy to have somebody to stalk, and breaking from the inside, you would imagine that Javier Castellano is going to hustle Highly Motivated out there and try to get him to the front end, just given the fact that he's shown tactical speed sprinting in the past. And I'm sure they want to win this race. Unlike Essential Quality, he does need to win if they want to get into the Kentucky Derby, so I think they're going to ride him to win, not to give him an education. And he's got to get the distance. I'm not sure he's necessarily going to love it. He's the son of Into Mischief. His dam was really more of a miler on the turf. But I'm not so much against him getting it, given a very favorable pace setup. And I was looking at the stats for Chad Brown, and in Formulator, it's often hard to find positive statistics for Chad Brown because he just gets bet down to be a short price so often, so the ROIs are typically below $2. But I looked at his stats second off a layoff, and second off a 90 to 180 day layoff, so 3 to 6 months in dirt routes, Chad Brown's 13 for 30 with an ROI of $2.63, a 43% win rate. So that just says to me, second off a layoff, he often gets these horses to improve. So I'll give Highly Motivated the slight nod at what figures to be a better price.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. It's definitely a race I'm going short in. If I use Highly Motivated, it would be more as a C type to Essential Quality, just because I want to spread in some of the other tougher races. But I'll never argue with somebody looking for a better price against a 3-5 favorite.
Yeah, and there are some other horses in here that have gotten a moderate amount of buzz on the Derby trail, but they just don't interest me in this spot. A, because they haven't run fast enough, and B, because they just all look to be so up against it from a pace standpoint. Moving on to those races from Aqueduct, we're going to talk about 2 of the 5 stakes races on their Saturday card, those preps for the Oaks and the Kentucky Derby. Beginning with race 9, it is the Grade 3 Gazelle going 1.125 miles, the same distance of the Wood Memorial. And I think the general expectation here is that search results is going to keep her undefeated record intact and stamp herself as one of the favorites for the Kentucky Oaks. But she does have to answer the stamina question as she stretches out to 2 turns for the first time, going a demanding 1.125 miles distance. And she's got to face a field of horses that, while they haven't run as fast as her and they're not as accomplished as she is, winning that stakes last time, they do all have different kinds of potential. They just all have so many questions to answer coming into this race.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty interesting betting race. I mean, it's a decent field size of 8. It's not huge, and search results does draw outside, which isn't great at 1.125 miles at Aqueduct. That turn comes up pretty quickly. I mean, it's not a death sentence or anything, but I would imagine Chad would prefer that he was drawn a little bit more inside. I mean, she's the obvious favorite, but she's one I'm going to try to beat because she hasn't run all that fast. She's trying 2 turns for the first time, as you mentioned, stretching out in distance. So I don't love her. She is the horse to beat for sure. And That's it. I didn't see a ton of threats in here, but the one horse that jumped out at me as the most interesting is the Grass is Blue. She's a filly who won the Basanda at this same mile and an eighth distance. She turned back to that one turn mile last time. And while it doesn't look like a great race on the running line, I mean, it's not a great race, period, but I think she ran better than looked. She encountered some traffic at a bad time in that race. She goes back to that furlong, that extra furlong. And I like that she's improved her TimeformUS speed figure every single time out. And that's despite that troubled trip last time in behind that slow pace where she basically had no chance when they turned for home, as search results and Miss Brazil had basically run 1-2 around the track and did very little running. So I'm going to give the Grass is Blue another shot in here to turn the tables.
Yeah, we have a very similar take on this race. I do expect Chad Brown to win this. I'm just not sure it's necessarily going to be with search results, because while the gap between them last time was over 6 lengths in that Busher, I don't feel like the gap in ability between these two going 9 furlongs is going to be 6 lengths. As you said, the Grass is Blue was compromised by a slow pace last time. A mile's a little bit sharp for her. And also, she was a little rank in the early going of that race, and I think that was just given the fact that they were moving so slow, because they put the blinkers on two back to get her a little more involved in the early going, and that worked in the Busanda. She was up close to the pace and finished it off really strongly. It was no detriment to her that she was a little keen in the early going racing with the blinkers, but last time out, she was held up behind a slow pace, and I just think it worked against her, because she's more of a grinder. She doesn't have that turn of foot that's going to allow her to sprint to the wire after they go slowly early. So I feel like given a fair race setup here, and if she can get into the race more gradually and grind down this field, that she's going to be more successful. And if she's a much bigger price than search results, I do expect her to be, I'd rather go with her as the value play in here. I'll be a little bit surprised if Chad Brown doesn't win this race, just because I have a tough time building a case for anybody else. You got a couple of turf horses in here, one for Graham Motion, one for Bill Mott. You've got Army Wife coming from Gulfstream, but I feel like she's faced extremely weak fields in her recent starts, so she's not for me. And I just feel like the others have way too many questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the grass horses, because to me it just feels like they're taking a shot, but I didn't see a whole lot on the pedigree, or it's not like they've been running particularly great on the turf either. So they weren't for me. I'm with you. I'm only using 2 horses in here, and that's both of the Chad Browns.
Moving on to that feature race at Aqueduct on Saturday. It is that Grade 2 Wood Memorial going 1 mile and an eighth, the prep for the Kentucky Derby, the final prep at Aqueduct this winter. And it's a really intriguing field. I would say of the 3 Kentucky Derby prep races we're going to talk about, while this one might not have the star power of some others, this is the most competitive wagering race, because you've got 5 horses that I listed below 10-1 on the morning line, and I could frankly build a case for all of them. You've got Prevalence, who is a horse that is somewhat polarizing coming into this race, having just won his 2 starts at Gulfstream against questionable competition. He's getting a class test. You've got Crowded Trade and Waybird, who finished in a photo for the Gotham. They're both stretching out around 2 turns for the first time. You've got last year's Remsen winner, Brooklyn Strong, who hasn't been seen for a while, but he certainly showed promise as a 2-year-old. And then you've got the horse that I made the morning line favorite, Risk Taking, who is 2 for 2 over this distance and won the Withers, but he just has to get a little bit faster.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting race. As you said, I think it's the best betting race out of the 3 Derby points races this weekend. A lot of different ways you can go here. I'll start with the horse you mentioned, Prevalence, just because as you said, he's kind of a polarizing horse in here. And personally, I don't want any parts of him in here. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Collaborate in that he won his last race. In his case, he's won 2 races very easily, but he just hasn't run that fast. And normally when horses win easily, fast horses will run fast races. Yeah, they might get geared down a little bit at the end, and people will say, oh, they could have run faster, but I'm just not seeing that here. So I think he's a definite play against for me. That said, there's still a lot of different ways you can go in here. The 2 Chad Brown horses certainly look formidable. Brooklyn Strong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say this was almost the plan after he won the Remsen, that they were all along going to bring him back in the wood. It still, to me, seems like a little bit much to overcome. Seems like he would have lost some seasoning, but it's one that's just going to come down to price and see how much he gets bet and if he's really ready to roll, because I think he's going to have to be if they actually have Kentucky Derby designs with this horse. But all that said, the horse I'm going with is the horse that really impressed me last time, and that's Wayburn winning the Gotham. He's stretching out to 1.125 like most of the others in here, if you have run it before. But I think he ran fine last time. He got a 111 speed figure. He showed his game. He's has the breeding to go 2 turns, go a little bit longer. And in a case like this, when a horse who I think is as fast or faster than anyone else is not going to be near the favorite, I'm going to side with him. So I'm going with Wayburn on top.
Yeah, we have a similar take on this race. Just want to clarify with Brooklyn Strong. It has been the plan for a while to target the Wood, but that's only because he had a setback really early in the winter, so they really never had the option of running an earlier prep race. And you can look at his workout tab coming into this. They couldn't even get him into training until the very last week in February. So it's not like he's been planning for this from a long way out. They kind of had to adjust their plan to make this Wood. So we'll see. I'm a little bit skeptical about him being ready for this race, just given the lack of preparation. But he did have the ability last year to beat a field like this. We saw that in the Remsid. That's a performance that was quite strong for a 2-year-old going 9 furlongs at the end of the year. I just wonder if he's going to be ready for another effort like that coming off the layoff. But I mean, he could be the forgotten horse in this race. I made him the biggest price of the contenders on the morning line, and I'm not going to be surprised if he drips up from there. I mean, as for the 2 Chad Brown runners, I do prefer risk taking. Just if he's going to be a short price, I have trouble taking a horse that does have to get faster as the favorite in this race. I think he's likely to take a step forward. I'm just not sure that likeliness will be commensurate with any kind of value. So I'm somewhat, I'm not against him. I'll say that I'm not going to make him my top pick, but I'm certainly using him. We have a very similar view of prevalence too. I mean, maybe he'll be the favorite in this race because it seems like a lot of people are just going gaga over this horse, and I don't quite see it. I have not been that taken with either of his races. I mean, he was visually impressive first time out, but that's not a maiden race that's come back as strong as a lot of people probably expected it to. And last time out, he was just beating a pitiful field. I've been talking about it for quite a while. That group of 3-year-olds down at Gulfstream this winter just has not been strong, and that's extended from the stakes races right down through the allowance and maiden races. And I think prevalence is going to get a real class test here. And Craig, we landed on the same horse. I mean, I did a in-depth preview of this race on DRF.com and their YouTube channel, where I handicapped all 3 of these Derby preps, and I made the elaborate case for Wayburn because I think there's a lot to like about this horse. I mean, as you said, he really took a step forward in the Gotham last time. He seems like one that just grew up over the winter, because he didn't look like this kind of horse last year, but he was much more professional last time. He actually switched leads late in his race, and that allowed him to put away Crowded Trade as they came onto the wire. And both of these horses have to answer the 1.125 question, but I feel like Wayburn is going to love it because he's this big, strapping son of Pioneer of the Nile. There's a ton of stamina breeding on the dam side. I know some people might see, like right off the top, if you look in Formulator, he's a half-brother to Yorkton, who was a sprinter, but Yorkton is a real outlier in that female family. Everybody else is a router. He's a half to Nipigon, who was a multiple 1.125 winner up at Woodbine, a stakes place performer, and the second dam is a router, or she's produced routers. So I just feel like Wayburn's going to love this distance. And I know the TimeformUS pace projector is predicting a fast pace. This is not one where I think they're going to be flying along up front. So I don't think it's a real detriment that Wayburn is going to be in a stalking position.
Yeah, I tend to agree about that pace projector, which is why I landed on Wayburn. I mean, these are 3-year-olds trying for the Kentucky Derby, so I don't expect a crawl fest or anything, but he's got good tactical speed, doesn't have to have the lead. I will say I didn't cheat this week. I haven't watched their previews, but I always do watch them, and I recommend them to anybody out there, whether you agree with David's picks or not. He always gives great information.
Let's wrap things up on this podcast and in that 3-year-old division this week with the final Derby prep that's taking place on Saturday. That is the Grade 1 Santa Anita Derby out west, going that same 1.125 distance. It is race 8 on Santa Anita's 12-race card on Saturday. And this race, the field has definitely ballooned in recent weeks because I would say maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago, it looked like this was going to be one of the smallest fields of the final round of Derby preps because Life is Good was expected to run here and he was scaring off many horses, but a lot have rerouted to this race, and some coming out of maiden races are just taking a shot because it seems like the field maybe didn't come up as tough as it was initially expected to. I still think Bob Baffert has a pretty formidable runner in here, though, in Medina Spirit, who, Craig, you know, and I'm sure I know you're on board with me. I've liked this horse for quite a while, going back to very early in the winter. I feel like he's always kind of unfairly been in the shadow of some of his more heralded Bob Baffert stablemates, even though he's shown a comparable amount of ability. And I think this is the race where Medina Spirit's going to shine.
Yeah, I think he's going to be very tough to beat in here. It's another one that looks, even though it's a big field of 10, it looks pretty straightforward to me. The two best horses are coming out of the same race, the San Felipe, both chased Life is Good in that spot, and were obviously easily beaten. But I thought they both ran pretty good, but I also think Medina Spirit showed that he's just better than Dream Shake at this point. I mean, that one is a little bit more lightly raced, so maybe you could expect some improvement, but he had every reason to run by Medina Spirit, who was chasing that much faster horse, a trip you don't often like to see. But the thing I like about Medina Spirit is he is just one game racehorse. He's had every reason to lose the Lewis 2 back when he just set a ridiculously fast pace when he drew down on the rail. He had every reason to give up the place against Life is Good, and he just dug in and keeps running to the wire. So this seems to be a much easier field. He's facing some of the same foes in Roman Centurion, who is a guy that just likes to pick up the pieces. But I think he showed how that Lewis pace really made him look better than he was. And when I see a horse like Rock Your World as the third choice at only 4-1, he doesn't scare me at all. So for me, it'll be Medina Spirit. I'm not buying that 5-2 morning line. I'd be surprised if he was 8-5, to be honest. I think he's going to be the pretty heavy favorite in here. So him for me, I think Dream Shake is going to run well and is the main danger. But at this point, Medina Spirit is the better racehorse.
Yeah, I agree. I think anything above probably 6-5, I would consider value on Medina Spirit because he just looks that likely to win this race, at least to me. And I know some people have been a little bit iffy on him stretching out in distance, probably just because they're not so familiar with a Protonico Brilliant Speed cross. He definitely has a little bit of an obscure pedigree, but I've always gotten the impression that this horse is going to appreciate added ground. He's a grinder. He's got a lot of grit to him, and he just seems like one that can gallop all day. And, you know, there was some question about the way that he was training into the San Felipe last time in that matchup with Life is Good. I've actually liked his workouts a lot more coming into this race, so I think we're going to see a good effort from Medina Spirit. And I agree with you. If there's one horse that's going to step forward out of the San Felipe, I think it's more likely to be Medina Spirit than it is Dream Shake, who, nothing against Dream Shake, who's shown a lot of ability. They're just asking so much of this lightly raced horse and stretching out to 1 1/8 in just his third career start, having only broken his maiden in early February. I feel like it's just a little too much too soon for this horse. So I'm not against him here. I just expect him to get another minor award. I could say the same about Roman Centurion, who I don't really view as a win candidate, but I do think he's going to appreciate the stretch out to 1 1/8. He's a horse that I've always wanted to see go longer distances. I just feel like the gap between him and Medina Spirit is too great at this point for him to make it up and turn the tables on that horse, but I think he'll get a minor award here, and I'm on the same page as you. I think the value in this race is playing against Rock Your World. If he's anything close to that 4-1, and I don't know if you were surprised to see him that low on the morning line. I kind of was, even though I know there's some buzz about this horse. I've seen a lot of chatter about this horse as a potential Derby candidate, but I don't get it. I mean, his turf races haven't been that visually impressive to me, and I look through his pedigree, and it's almost all turf influence, especially on the dam side. So I don't know why this horse is not 20-1 in this race. He's just not for me. So I would look to play against him and use others underneath.
Yeah, the only thing I can figure is it's just John Sagler, and he wins a lot of dirt races, but not particularly with 3-year-olds. So I did the same glance as you did at the pedigree, though I knew you'd bring it up. So I left the heavy lifting for you, but I saw all turf there, so I wasn't interested in him at all.
Well, Craig, it's a really exciting weekend of racing coming up. I know I'll be glued to the TV screen on Saturday, just taking it all in, and we'll have a couple days to process it before we talk about it on the TimeformUS Pacecast next week. But I'll be looking forward to recapping these races and making some sense of them, because after this week, we really will. It'll start to be time to sort things out for the Kentucky Derby. We'll just have a couple prep races left, really just one major prep left in Arkansas. But the picture is going to be pretty settled after this week, and it seems like this always happens pretty quickly, where things look muddled and they get cleared up in a very short period of time, but that'll happen after Saturday.
Yeah, we'll be mostly there. Other than I'm forgetting his name, but the Bob Baffert horse who won the Rebel, I assume is going to go in the Arkansas Derby. He was highly impressive that day. But for the most part, we're going to be settled outside of a couple from there, maybe. So, I mean, these are the reason we talk about betting, and I know we're both bettors and like the horses, but I think we're both big fans of the sport as well. And this is the kind of weekend you wait for because it's just a parade of good horse after good horse, intriguing matchups, some not so intriguing, but sometimes those throw you the curveballs that you're just not expecting. So, if every race was easy as they look on paper, it would be an easy game. But we know they're not, so it's always worth staying tuned, keeping your eyes open. And I know I'll be glued to the television Saturday watching and betting these races from all three tracks.
Yeah, plenty to look forward to this weekend. Hopefully we give out some good ideas from the wagering side of things, but we'll be appreciating all of these races regardless. So thanks for listening this week. Remember that you can tune in on Tuesday to catch our recap of these races on that TimeformUS Pacecast, and you can catch both of these podcasts all the time on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. So again, thanks for listening, and check out the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.